Hello. I'm just going to start my timer so I don't talk for way too long because there's a lot. Alright, let's do it. Hello, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to share Stardust with you. Before I get into it, I also just wanted to acknowledge the lands that we're on today, as it has always been a land of storytelling, and I'm really privileged to be able to stand here and tell my story like so many people have done before, so this feels very special. And just wanted to say thank you to Tamara for including me in today, as it's Tamara's last Creative Mornings. Let's give her a big clap because she's brought in so many creatives and like it's so special. And for me as well, this feels like a bit of a bookend to this year making Stardust. So this is kind of rounding out the year of this massive project. So it feels really special to be able to talk to you about this today. So let's get into it. This is a little bit of a slideshow of the work that I did before entering into the Australian Wearable Art Fashion Festival. So just a little bit of information before we get into Stardust. I started crochet 3 years ago, and then on the second year, my cousin Maddie called me, and she's like, Bella, you should apply for the Australian Wearable Art Fashion Festival. And I'm like, okay, sure, like we'll apply. I didn't even have a portfolio. I didn't have anything. I'd never even made crochet pants before. And then I ended up making this piece here for Diva Bushka. It's called Diva Bushka, and I made this in 2023 for the Australian Wearable Art Fashion Festival. And I ended up winning, which was wild. And it wasn't about winning per se, but it was just, I was such a rookie. I'd never even made crochet pants. I just really went for it. And I think what I would like anyone to get from this chat today is that like any creative person, like we have no idea what we're doing. Like I still have no idea. I don't even know how I made that sometimes. Like we have no idea. And it's a real fake it till you make it energy to get to do really big projects. You can only plan so much, and a lot of what I'll talk about today is just about letting go and just giving into the process. And sometimes you have to let certain parts of the project go to allow the better parts to come through. So essentially this is just a giant show and tell. So I'm really glad that you want to listen to this today. So when I was starting Stardust, where was I in terms of like my brain? I just finished Diva Bushka, which was a massive project in itself. It was a grief piece dedicated to my mama that you can see up on the screen. And I was coming out of this like massive grief cycle. So, and when Diva Bushka was over, it was really strange because I didn't even expect to win. I didn't even expect anything. I was just happy to be there. And then I won, and then it just belonged to the world. Diva Bushka was out there for everybody, and then I was like, okay, is it done now? Is like the grief process done now? And I don't think it ever is. And when I started Stardust, I was like, okay, I've got to put Diva Bushka in a box and move on. And as I go through the slides today, you'll see how I pulled her back out to bring her through all my next projects. Going to try not to cry. Can't make any promises. So let's get into some Stardust energy. So this is where we were beginning. I'd made like thousands of flowers and I was tired, but I knew I wanted to come back this year and make another piece. I definitely had the drive to come back and do it again because it was such a fluke. I was like, let's see what we can do. So when I was starting Stardust, this is about 50 weeks ago. So today we're doing a bit of a countdown to the runway as how I got to making Stardust. So this was the first body of work I made post Diva Bushka. I chopped up all the yarn ends that I saved from Babushka into like micro pieces, then threw glitter in it and then photographed it because this is how I see yarn. Yarn to me is paint. Yarn to me is any other ingredient or material that you would use to create fine art. To me, crochet is no different than any other like artistry, and I'm super passionate about sharing crochet as a legitimate art form that has been around for a very long time, and it's always been undermined because it has been predominantly female-based as well. It's not included when you think of art. Crochet is always put into the craft box, and I'm super passionate about crochet being seen as a legitimate art form because it takes a lot of technical ability to be able to do high skill crochet like this. So this is where we were beginning. So I didn't even know it was Stardust energy yet, but I was thinking about something. So this between that and that was about 15 weeks, and then we got to doing some storyboarding. So where it took me was, when I finished Di Babushka, is I felt like I was frozen in time when my mama passed away. It was a really, really pivotal time in my life. So I did feel like I was frozen, and like Di Babushka thawed me out. So I kind of reverted back to like, where was I in my teenage years after all of this happened? Where was I? What was I doing? So I grew up in Townsville on the Great Barrier Reef. This is my mum and I in the reef when I was young. So I kind of went back to these very like water-based images. I kept saying to my partner after Di Babushka, I was like, I just want to be seaweed. I want to be at the bottom of the ocean, watching the sun, swaying, not being anything. I didn't want any of this. It felt really overwhelming. I'm just like a little homebody that doesn't do anything and just crochets at home. Like, I wasn't ready for all of the craziness that happened. So I was really kind of like running away from it all. After Di Babushka, it was such a wild journey. So I was really kind of like reclusive. So I was painting a lot. I was really trying to get in touch with all of my old things that gave me joy. So that's where we were starting with it. And then at 30 weeks, I was working on a concept that involved a lot of free-form crochet. And I was super, super excited about it. As you can see, I made so many samples. I took them to the beach. That's this dress here at the beach, by the way. That was really fun. And I went really, really hard with making samples. And that's another little nugget that I would suggest to anyone, is don't be afraid of samples and fabric samples and trialing out fabrics and trialing out new techniques. I would love to make this silhouette that you see in the top left here is something I'm super excited to make when I have the technical ability, but I wasn't able to actually pull that off in time for this year's runway. So this particular concept was actually scratched. I worked on it for 2 months, and I was like, you know what, I don't have the technical ability. It wasn't looking how I wanted it to look. It was very flat, and my work's very has a lot of volume and movement. So I was like, you know what, bench that for another time. But it was a really fun silhouette to mock up anyway. So where was I at 20 weeks? So I actually went to AI. I know AI is a bit of in the creative world, it's a bit, people are a bit on the fence about it, and I just had a lot of fun conceptually visualizing what a crochet sea monster would look like. Because my work, I don't really see anyone that does work like me. There are people who do wild crochet, but the wild crocheters sit in our own little universes. Like, none of us look the same, and I love that. So I didn't really have any reference points that I liked. So I went to AI, and it was really fun to use it as a tool. So this is where I started with AI. So you can see how silly it can be. I love them though. That's iconic. I actually would love to make that one day. That just looks like so much fun. And my little tip for AI, if you're ever wanting to use it as a tool to conceptualize concepts, is that it is only as good as what you're putting into it. So whenever you see AI out there is a really big creative brain behind it. So don't dismiss it when you see an image that's AI, because usually the AI that you see online is also edited in post. So you're getting someone's creative input, you're then getting the app that churns it out, but then I edited all of these to make it more myself as well. So AI kind of just gave me a little bit of a spit out, and then I did it myself as well. So you can use it as a tool to just tease out ideas that just aren't coming to you, because I was really lost. So I ended up submitting with my application to the Australian Wearable Art Fashion Festival these last set of images here, because I thought they were much more realised in the concept that I wanted to achieve, which was a crochet sea monster emerging from the genderless, so gender fluid, non-binary energy, and just being very powerful at the same time. And I really wanted to use fluorescent pink. That was a very conscious decision early on, and green, they're kind of my colours that I use in most of my projects. So this particular storyboard of images, which I developed over a few weeks, really helped me. And I just wanted to chat about the AI component to that. So 16 weeks, let's go. So it got to a point where my partner was like, you just have to start, Bella, because I just kept on conceptualizing. This is my monster book of other stuff that came out from the project. And my partner was like, Bella, just start. So that's what I had to do. Because I was just like, concept every week. I was like, no, scrap it, next one, scrap it, next one. And I was actually just getting into a bit of a rat race in my own mind. So we started. And the first thing I made was not included in Stardust, but I made I made these giant ruffles. These were originally meant to be at the bottom of Stardust. So these were the first pieces that I made for it. But as you can see, it's very big. This is very heavy, and it overweighed the silhouette way too much. So balancing the weight of all of this to be functional on stage was the biggest challenge that I had throughout this whole thing. And this is what I learned with Dear Babushka as well, is I had to scrap a big ruffle on the bottom skirt of that look, which took me about 70 hours to make. I had to scrap it. And these two ruffles, because there's another one of these, because there was meant to be one for each side. These took me about a month to make, and that they ended up being scrapped. But this is what I started with. So it's also a little bit of a, if you have to scrap things and if you have to move on, like you mourn it for a day and you move on. Don't think about it too much. Don't beat yourself up too much about it. We all have to scrap stuff and we all have to just get rid of it. It does hurt in the moment. You're like, oh no, I'm starting from scratch again, but you're not. You know what you need to do now better and you know how it's going to fix the problem. So it's sometimes you create your own problems to fix them. That's what I've learned a lot about in Stardust. So I wanted to bring this to show you that there's always a lot of samples that don't make the final cut. So this is where we were. This is the first fitting that we did. So technically to make Stardust what it is, there's a lot of hidden trickery that goes on here. So you can see the metal that's up here with the crochet. I went and bought like a security screen and cut out 2 big panels of metal and then sewed the crochet into the metal. So the big fins that you see at the bottom here, they've got that shape because there's actually metal all inbuilt into it. And it took my partner and I about a whole weekend. You can see us sewing it into the individual squares up there. And this part of the project, which was all deep green, one colour. For me, awful. I was so depressed the whole time. This took me like 2 months of just deep green, no colour changing. All of this here, if any crocheters are here, single crochet at 3mm hook. Do you know how slow that is? That is so slow. It was so painful, it was so slow. But this work here had to be really tight. It had to be very functional. There was no room for it to be swaying or any movement because crochet stretches a hell of a lot. So it had to be really tight, it had to be really meticulous. It had to serve a really big function, and a lot of that you don't even see in Stardust now, but it's all there. So that's also a bit of a note for these kinds of projects, is there's so much hidden work that you don't get to see. So the countdown begins. So this is 15 weeks. So you can see baby Stardust on the stage here. It's a little baby model that I made of Stardust to apply to the show. I really wanted to use fluorescent green, but then once I started mocking it up in big, it was giving me a migraine. And like all the colour, all the fluorescent green. And if it's giving me a migraine, I have a really high tolerance to a lot of colour. And if it's making me feel uncomfortable, like the average person does not like colour as much as I do. So I was like, you know what? I don't think the fluorescent green worked in a big model. In a small model it looked great, but in big it was a bit much, and I knew being on a runway, it's going to be under fluorescent lights and it's going to be even more fluorescent. So I was like, I think the pink can carry the weight of the fluorescent. And then, so we had to take off all the green, we had to undo all the green and start again. And up the top you can see, I was really pedantic about what fluorescent pink yarn I was going to use. It was very important. It couldn't be too red because that one at the end was really good. But then it was too red on camera. I liked the purple and cooler tone fluorescent pink. I think it matched better with the blue that I decided to go with. So colours are very important. And this was about 2 weeks of work, and again, we had to undo it and we had to start again. A lot of that happens. At 14 weeks, where are we going? I was feeling much more confident at this stage with the colourways that I had decided. It calmed me. I think I was so anxious after working in deep green for so long, then trying fluorescent. I was losing my mind. You can see how the ruffles really did take over my space. I was living in like a coral prison, it felt like, at this stage. But I was much happier once I got to this stage. But this is where things were starting to get really hard because there was so much weight. There was so much weight to it. I'm the first one to acknowledge that my work is not practical. It's not practical, it's a little bit silly, but it also evokes a big response from people, and it does a bigger thing than just being a garment. So that's what I always think when I'm going into it. I'm like, it's not meant to be worn every day. It's not meant to be an everyday thing. I mean, we can. The model who modelled Stardust, Shani, is here, by the way, so shout out to Shani. Shani will attest that we do not want to wear this every day, but it was beautiful to wear it when we did. Anyway, I'm digressing. So at this stage, I was feeling confident with the colours. As you can see, I was still trying to break out and add purples and all kinds of things. I was getting distracted those days. And then we started working on the shoulder part here. So you can see the deep green that I worked with that was really tight. I then added ruffles and then added the big ruffles on top of that. So if you're ever wanting to do anything with crochet that does require big silhouettes, you've got to start with a really, really confined base so it doesn't stretch. That's a little tip there for that. So that's where I was at this stage, feeling pretty good. And then at 8 weeks to go, this is only 8 weeks to go, like we were under the time crunch. I was saying to my partner the other day, we were working to the minute every day. Every single day I was working to like the spare minute to get as much done as possible. It was so tight with the turnaround, with the decisions that we had to make, because things were not easy to get it to looking like that. There was so much that we had to refine. So every single day, like after my job, and before my job, just every single second I was working to it. So this is the start of making the headdress. A lot of people think it's a helmet underneath there, but I'm an absolute masochist to myself. I made the whole thing from scratch, so it's ridiculous really. But this is where you can see the pant line was starting, the head was starting. I'm starting to play with beads a little bit. We're starting to explore and experiment with it. So yeah, it was getting tight now to get it done in time. So then with this amount of time to go, I wasn't really sure how I was going to use beads, but I knew I wanted to use beads. So the reason why I wanted to use beads is I always try and include things from my life that are significant to me. And when I was a young kid, so this is why I did the flared crochet pants. When I was a young kid, my dad in Toowoomba in the 90s would wear these like outrageous beaded crochet pants. He's just iconic. And I remember them so viscerally, and I was like, and he's a massive beader, so I really wanted to put beads in for my dad. Every piece that I do, I try and include a bit of my people in there, and it was really nice really nice to do that. And you know, he actually helped me with the beading. He went home to Rockhampton and took home 10,000 beads, threaded it, and then mailed it back to me. Also, Josh and Ivy helped me with beading. They're here today as well. Everyone was involved. I couldn't do it on my own. Like all my people, they really did carry me through. I could not have done it without them. So yeah, at this stage I was playing with beading, but I didn't really know how I wanted it to go. But what stayed in my brain is I wanted the beaded components to almost look like a little virus. People always say my work reminds them of like a crochet virus taking over, and I kind of wanted Stardust to be like glowing from within. If they were at the bottom of the ocean and they crawled up, they would have a bunch of barnacles and species like living on them, you know. So the beads were meant to be a bit intrusive. That was very much a thought that went into the design process there. So getting them to work was tricky. So I made so many samples, drew it so many times. It was getting so hard to nail down exactly how I was going to pull it off, but we ended up getting there. So at 4 weeks to go, the pants are underway. They were really hard to get to work right, but we got there in the end. So all the beads that you see there are individually crocheted beads into the garment. So it was extremely slow process. If there was one knot in the yarn, if you're a crocheter, you know that knots just happen in yarn. If there was one knot, we'd have to take all the beads off the yarn that we had threaded and then thread them again, because you can't just put the beads over onto a new yarn. It just doesn't work like that, because they're tightly threaded onto the thread. So it was a whole process. Like Josh would get up for work one day, thread me maybe 500 beads, but then some days there'd be a knot in it. So those 2 hours that he'd spent threading beads would just go. So it was a lot of just working with material and learning to just, those days when things just like weren't working, we just had to like rise above and just be like, Stardust energy, we got this. Like really, like it was a bit of a hustle, but we were getting there. At 3 weeks to go, we were starting to make some progress. At this particular fitting, it was so heavy. I remember it was not working. Yeah, the breakdown day. I think it was a little bit earlier than 3 weeks to go. Don't mind my timeline, it was very loosely put together. But there was one fitting when Shani came over and everything did not work. Shani put it on, it cut them, it was uncomfortable, it was not working. And I really did have a full-on breakdown that day. It was really hard because I'd spent weeks getting it to the point where it was a functional silhouette to like put on, and then it just didn't work. But then Josh came to the rescue and he's like, Bella, you need a backpack. I'm like, what? No. And he's like, we need to sew it into a backpack. So we bought a backpack, and then I had to sew the whole silhouette into a backpack. So with a big darning needle, I had to sew through metal, about 3 layers of crochet, and then a backpack. I had to use a hammer to get the nail through all of those things to just sew it into the backpack to get it functional enough. Like my hands, my body was so sore by the end of it, but we did it. And sometimes with wearable art, the fixes are so simple. Backpacks, harnesses, all those things, they really do the Lord's work with with the silhouettes. So it was coming together. What we were figuring out now is the details on the line of the chaps. So the buckle, the beaded crochet G-string, very important for the silhouette, and then the pasties and everything. And then my mum definitely came to my rescue. A lot of the little ruffles you see on the beaded components, my mum did that. Every week she would come over and I would give her a pile of beaded centers, and I'm like, go off and ruffle, and ruffle, ruffle, ruffle. And she probably did like 200 ruffle edges for me, so thanks Mum, that was really helpful. Looking back at it, I was like, oh thank God, because I would not have been able to get it done, so I was super, super grateful. And one of the last kind of design things that I did end up adding was including all the beading down the side of the fins that you can see here, and I'm so glad I did that, because I think it allowed the beads to have a moment on the side here, and particularly for the side silhouette. But that was all done within the last week, so I had to do like hundreds and hundreds of beaded centers, and then edging them, and it was the whole thing. This was the first G-string mock-up that I did. I did like a beaded front, then sewed it into underwear, but I didn't like that. It didn't look very good, so I had to redo that again. So at this point, there were so many things up in the air, and I did not know if it was going to happen. But we were getting there. It was starting to work, and I remember, I'm just going to go back one slide, because this photo here of Shani and I, this is when it was actually functional. It was such a big moment. I remember when it actually worked and the weight was okay, like not like for like long term, but when it was functional to wear for a runway performance and it was good, we took that photo. It was very important. So yes, that is where we were at. So 1 week to go. There was a lot to get done. I was working on the headdress. That's how big it was going to be. It was going to be absolutely ridiculous. And I remember Josh coming home from work and he's like, oh my God. I was like, no, it's amazing. It's going to work. He's like, no, it's not. So he's like, I love you, but no. Partners really do help with the process in the sense that like you need someone to tell you no, and it's really hard when you're like a little creative being that just wants to have all the ideas getting done, but you've got to have someone be like, actually no, that's not going to work. So thank you, Josh. He was my coach and just helped get me through and kept me on track, so it was amazing. So this is like the process of the headdress. So I had to cut that foam core piece down by half in height to get it to what it looks like there today, because it obviously has to be wearable. For the Australian Wearable Art Fashion Festival, it's a 2-minute runway performance done 3 times. So it has to be worn 3 times, it's got to last and work for 3 shows, and it has to be on the runway for 2 minutes with some kind of choreography. So like there's movement, it's not like a static runway performance. So that's how that was going, and this is kind of like a little bit of a storyboard of just where we started with Stardust to how we were going. And I was really happy with the outcome, like how we actually pulled it all together. But that was just a few days before the runway, so it was tight. The timeline was tight. So this is a few of the last minute details. My dogs were always lying on top of everything when I was taking photos, so if you see dog fluff on it, it's Phoenix and Jinx. This is us rehearsing down my street. It was very fun for my neighbours to see what I do. Sometimes they have a little weirdo on the street, and then every 6 months we're just rehearsing runway things. They're like, oh, she's out again. She's left the house. She's left the house again. before the runway, there were a few details we had to do. I had to harness the headdress, and it was hilarious because this was at 11 o'clock at night. I had no clip available to me besides my dog's harness, so I chopped up Jinx's harness, and it worked. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I remember Josh was away. I was at home alone. I was having a meltdown, and yeah, I just chopped up Jinx's harness and sewed it in, and it worked. So a lot of it is just you just do what you've got to do to get it to get it done. And this is what we were doing the night before the runway. I am not over-exaggerating, I did not sleep that night. I arrived to the show with 0 sleep. I was working to the very last second, sewing in the base of the headdress and finishing the little details down the side. Also to note, I'd never seen the G-string, the final G-string on Shiny before the runway performance, and we'd never really tried it with the pasties. So it was very high stakes. We did not know how this was going to go. These are a few of my favourite photos backstage before we get into the final photos of Stardust. In all, taking it and going through this whole process, I wish I could have gone into a little bit more of the personal journey that I went on, but I really did want to talk about the crochet today. But this project was such a life-changing project for me because I feel like I reconnected with myself after making Diva Bushka and kind of making a piece to honour the women in my life that got me to where I am. Stardust was really about me reclaiming who I am, unmasking, being silly, but also being really good. Being silly and good, that's kind of what Stardust was about. And it's about having fun with it, but and taking it seriously at the same time. I think with especially wearable art and high fashion worlds, you don't really see the camp and fun nature to it. I'm extremely flamboyant and camp, and I really wanted to carry my love of drag and over-the-top aesthetics onto a runway, and doing it with Shiny as well. Shiny also brought out a lot of what Stardust is because making it to Shiny's body it brought out different elements to it as well. So it was a massive personal journey. I shaved my head in that time. I really connected with myself. So taking it and getting to the Australian Wearable Art Show was the outcome. I didn't really care what happened at the show, but it was just beautiful to get there. And Did Babushka was on stage as well. Babushka was included in the pre-show of Australian Wearable Art, and it was just incredible. It was such a beautiful process this year. I really went to ground. I learned so much, and yeah, it was so fun. The most challenging thing I've ever done, but it was so fun. So here are the runway photos from the Australian Wearable Art Show. It was absolutely amazing to see Stardust on the stage. It was really nerve-wracking because it was worked down to the minute, but we got it there in time. A little bit of a fun fact about the crocheted beaded G-string. I mean, I grew up in the 90s with Kath and Kim and all those references, so we had to bring some camp into it, and it was about being a sexy little monster. It wasn't about being sexual, and that's what I wanted to make it about. It wasn't about the fact that there was skin out or pasties or any of that. It was more the silhouette worked like that altogether. If it was all completely covered, it wouldn't have the movement and things that it did. So everything served a much bigger purpose. And Shani's such a beautiful and natural and confident performer. And Shani brought that part out on the runway as well and did an amazing job. We performed it to Mushrooms by Meredith Bull, and it's a song about living people eat dead mushrooms and living mushrooms eat dead people. So it was about just being really weird, having fun with it, being camp, and I ended up winning again. So that was pretty cool. So I ended up winning the show 2 years in a row, which was absolutely wild to me. Yeah. Really humbling, and the fact that I was able to back it up, everyone, I even had to do a press day before going into this, and everyone's like, Bella, it's the second album. I'm like, I know, I know it. Whatever I do, people were going to think things, so I was like, you may as well just shoot so far above, what you think you can do, and hopefully you land somewhere that's, somewhere that you're proud of, and I did. So Stardust didn't end up being what I thought it was going to be in my early concepts. I had to let go of a lot of those things, but what we did end up with was a pretty spectacular piece, and it's been such a beautiful journey taking it to the public, because everyone's been so wildly supportive. I was very scared to debut this on a runway where things are not as maybe fluid as what I was doing. It was definitely a piece that stood out in the sense it was pushing a few little boundaries, but I'm really glad that I did. I didn't regret pushing them. In fact, I was like, what can we do next time? Where can we take it next time? So I just really appreciate you wanting to listen to this chat today about this project. It's been so special to me, and it's really brought my inner circle together. And referring it back to thread, like this month's theme, crochet very much has been like a needle and thread for my life. It's definitely put me back together over the last few years, and now I've kind of come out of these two massive runway projects being like, my life is completely different now, and I've definitely put everything back together. So this is what Stardust is for me, and if you take anything from this today, it's just have a go at things, and if you have to ditch it and start again, that's totally fine. We all have to do that from time to time. If you have any questions or anything, that is my little Stardust chat. Thank you so much.